Welcome to the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me, as always, is my producer, Kevin Black. Special guest today. I wrote a piece, in case you haven't caught it yet, up on the No Ceiling Substack. I wanted to talk about the Charlotte Hornets, not only just Lamelo Ball, but I also wanted to talk about Miles Bridges and the leap that he's taken this year as well, seemingly to becoming a star. I actually called him a star at the very end of the piece. If you haven't read it already, definitely go check it out. The No Ceiling Substack, subscribe, the whole 9 yards. But there is no other person I would rather talk about Charlotte Hornets basketball with than Mr. Lee Branscombe. Lee, how you doing?
I am fantastic. It's always a pleasure to jump on the Draft Deeper pod. I love your guys' stuff on Twitter. I thought the article was fantastic today, so definitely direct folks to that. And I'm excited, man. I'm still kind of like getting used to the fact that people actually want to talk about the Hornets.
They're not only the league pass darlings anymore. Now it's like the Charlotte Hornets are a very legitimately good basketball team.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I mean, and I'm sure we'll kind of get into, what's sustainable, maybe what isn't, how real is this start? I am leaning, and we'll get into like the more of the nuance with it, I'm sure, but I am
Yep.
kind of leaning towards the fact that this is absolutely like a semi-real start. I mean, I think there are some sustainable things. Do I think the Hornets are going to finish second in offensive rating in the entire NBA? Probably not. But do I think that they can be a playoff team in the East? Absolutely.
So we've already kind of kicked this podcast off to an incredible start. But before we dive too far down the Charlotte Hornets rabbit hole, Lee, you've been doing a whole bunch of stuff that I've been noticing on social media. I believe you're now a part of a brand new Hornets podcast. Why don't you update my audience in case they don't already follow you on Twitter at Which Carolina with everything you're doing? I want you to definitely talk about that.
No, I appreciate that. So like you said, at Which Carolina on Twitter is kind of the hub. You can find everything there. The Which Carolina podcast is still alive and well, and the Which Carolina podcast is really specifically now just a NBA draft podcast. I've kind of pretty much ported all of my Charlotte Hornets content over to the Buzz Beat Pod, spelled just like it sounds, as an official co-host. And the guys on the Buzz Beat Pod have actually been doing it for quite a few years, back into the like doldrum days of Kimball Walker and almost nothing else. And they have done a fantastic job, like slowly but surely kind of cultivating an audience. So when they asked me to come join as a co-host, I was super pumped. So yeah, man, I appreciate you letting me do that. Which Carolina, all my NBA draft stuff, Buzz Beat Pod, all our Hornet stuff.
No, like I already said at the top, there is no other person that I want to talk to or go read or listen anything about Charlotte Hornets other than you, my friend. So with that being said, I think the plug is absolutely well deserved. You've always been a great guest on my podcast. And let's dig into some of the meat and potatoes about the Charlotte Hornets. So God, my first initial reactions watching this team this year so far, and this is really a lot of what I want to do with this podcast on a second episode of the week. Obviously, cover as much draft stuff as possible, but also really talk about the young guys in the NBA and finding different ways to tie NBA coverage into some of the guys that have just come into the league. But watching this team, watching not only LaMelo, Miles, but the collective as a whole, damn, you guys are playing fast. Like, holy hell, I wrote it right in my piece. I said, if I was trying to play defense against the Hornets right now, I'd be swearing every single trip up and down the floor. Like, holy shit, they're doing this again. Miles is just like leaking out like 3 seconds ahead of everybody else again. Like, what? But that's really, to me, been the most noticeable change, I think. And it's not that your team's personnel has really changed that much. It's just completely have wiped away a lot of the more slower pace stuff that you guys were doing last year. Now it's every single thing you're doing. It's just grab and go. Even when you bring the ball up and you get into what you would think would be a more traditional half court set, you guys are running very simple 1 to 2 read actions, and you're finding ways to still get plenty of shots up anywhere from like 8 to 12 seconds left of the shot clock. So you're still operating at a very fast pace. So Lee, why don't you talk to me about some of your initial thoughts on what you've seen through 4 games so far? Why don't you enlighten myself as well as my audience about everything that you're seeing?
Well, it's a very astute observation, and you're right. I think I tweeted in the Boston game, like at halftime, I felt like my head was spinning, kind of like trying to keep up with the action both ways. And you did a good job in the article of kind of differentiating Boston's, I guess, willingness more than anything else to make
Yep,
sure that they were trying to get back and contest shots. I think there's a couple distinctions here. The first thing is I James Borrego has tried to play quicker each year of his regime in Charlotte. And I think, people forget, like, the Borrego regime started prior to LaMelo Ball. So I just don't think from a roster construction standpoint, James Borrego had kind of the horses, if you will, to play kind of this up tempo. And it's almost like the chicken or the egg, right? It's, was this something James Borrego wanted to do all along?
sure.
Or was the emergence of LaMelo Ball the impetus to allowing him to do so?
Yep,
I'm not in his brain. I'm not sure which way to go on that one. But what is evident is, you know, the year prior to LaMelo Ball, it was basically like, this was Devonte Graham emerging as a second year player. And it was essentially just very vanilla spread pick and roll, try and
yep,
create offense, kind of like slow, deliberate slowness on purpose to try and stay competitive, if that makes
yep,
sense. Whereas now, and to your point, obviously LaMelo and Miles, I think, headline the reason for the pace. But you also, and you mentioned this in your article, you also had a backup point guard in Ish Smith that, in the words of
God,
Eric,
I love Ish Smith. He is he. I'm not saying he's the best backup point guard in the league, but he's my
right.
favorite backup point guard in the league, without a doubt, no question.
Well, right, and for Hornets fans, Ish Smith is from the Charlotte area originally, played high school ball
Yep.
there, played at Wake Forest, so he's getting a hero's welcome. And in the words of Eric Collins, our wonderful play-by-play guy, Ish is quicker than a hiccup. So, so I guess the point I'm trying to make here is, I do think Mitch Kupchak and the front office kind of deliberately acquired personnel when you think about Ish Smith and Kelly Oubre in particular, another kind of
Yep.
versatile, switchy, athletic wing that is comfortable playing in transition and in pace. And when you also take kind of the more macro view of Devonte Graham and Malik Monk out, pushing all your chips in, for better or worse, as LaMelo on kind of the sole offensive playmaking engine. I just think pace comes with that. And the last point I'll make before I kick it back to you is, I think this is a distinction to make too. Like, most teams want to run off misses. Like, when you snare a
Yep.
defensive rebound, that's a good opportunity to try and get up the floor and get an easy basket. I think what's really interesting about the Charlotte Hornets right now is they
Somebody
are
literally
very,
sprints to the baseline to get that ball right back into play, even on a make. It's
bingo,
incredible.
bingo, exactly. They are pushing off makes or misses. It doesn't matter. And particularly, I think the Cleveland game kind of sticks out in my mind more than any on, give up a basket and literally get a layup within like 3 seconds of giving up that basket on the other end, which just kind of, it's demoralizing, I think, to an opposing team when they work so hard. Not that our defense is the Iron Curtain by any means, but when they work, when they work hard to produce a basket, and then LaMelo throws a 75-foot pass down the floor to a Gordon Hayward or Miles Bridges dunk or layup. I do think there's a little bit of a demoralizing effect for the opposing team when that happens.
So you guys have quite a number of players on offense who are so cohesive in
Mm.
playing with one another, and we'll get into Lamelo and then Miles specifically in how they've grown, or how they've accustomed to playing at a faster pace along with everybody else this year. But first of all, I noted this towards the end of the piece. Terry Rozier has been out for you guys.
Right.
He played in what, like 23 minutes in game one, I think, if I'm correct on that. And then he's been out ever since.
Yeah, in the Cleveland game, in game 2, he played
Game two.
like 22 minutes and really was not himself or very effective, and injured his other ankle in that game than the one he was previously recovering from.
So offensively, those minutes, that role of his per se has gone to Kelly Oubre, as you
Yep.
said. But Terry Rozier has become a really, really good offensive player in the NBA. I know Coach David Thorpe likes to talk about him as much as he can. Terry Rozier is probably one of my favorite underrated corner 3-point shooters in the league, along with Jaylen Brown. I feel like every time either of those guys catches the ball in the corner and they go up with it, it's probably going to go in. I think he shot like 45% what I noted on corner threes last year. So that's a key component that you're missing within the offense. But at the same time, you have Kelly Oubre, who is more willing, I think, than ever at this point to move to get the ball out in the move. Like, he has become an actual willing passer. He's not just jacking up every single shot that he
Right.
sees, which is important. And then you also have Gordon Hayward in this year, who Gordon Hayward, at least through these 4 games, has taken a little bit of a step back in terms of his offensive efficiency. But he's another guy. He's just a calming presence within the offense. He's somebody who
That's
knows
right.
how to get the ball to where he needs to go. And oh, by the way, Mason Plumlee, nobody ever talks about Mason Plumlee's passing ability for what he's able to do at the center spot. Like, he also has kept the ball moving and just does a lot of the right things within the offense. So it's not just Lamelo and Miles, it's some of the other guys as well. Cody Martin's looked really good. Jalen McDaniels has always been somebody who I've had an eye on. Why don't you talk to me about some of these other guys who have contributed to the Hornets' success, not just Lamelo and Miles?
Yeah, well, I think your first point is really important. I mean, there's a pretty logical argument, in my opinion, that Terry Rozier was the best player on the team last year.
Mm-hmm.
Gordon Hayward missed a long stretch of games. LaMelo Ball, who had obviously a fantastic rookie season, missed a long stretch of games. I think in the last 6 weeks of the season, Miles Bridges was our best player, and you're seeing that carry over.
Yep.
But from like a full season standpoint, Terry Rozier was the best player on this team last year. So the fact that they've been able to do what they've done offensively without his shooting that you correctly kind of identified and diagnosed, it's also the movement shooting too. Like James Borrego, in my opinion, is one of the better kind of like post timeout situational action like directors in terms of drawing something up in a specific situation to get his best shooter a shot. And that was a staple of our offense last year, was Terry Rozier coming
Yep.
off like movement, shooting down screens, double screens, all that type of stuff. That's not there. So you're seeing a very kind of neutered playbook, I would say, on the offensive side. But maybe it's kind of that keep it simple, stupid. Like the Hornets know who they are. They know what's effective right now, and they're sticking to it. But in terms of kind of like ancillary pieces, I think you make a great point about Mason. There was some time, preseason particularly, but even in the first couple games where you could absolutely tell that he was still kind of trying to figure out where he fits in, where he can be effective, what is his role, what's his kind of chemistry with some of these other guys. I think that is kind of course, that'll be a work in progress throughout the entire season, but he already seems to have settled in a bit. I think you noted in the article that he's been kind of a glass cleaner on the defensive side of the ball, which
Yep.
is absolutely true. He is not an elite rim protector by any means. Charlotte still kind of lacks that specialty role, but he is a much better passer than people realize, which you just hit on. And he also, believe it or not, Mason Plumlee's fairly comfortable taking 3 or 4 dribbles up the floor and getting the ball out
Yep.
into the passing lanes. It's not something I don't think Hornets fans want to see a ton of, but like, just to continue to reiterate the pace point, like most of the time there are 5 guys on the floor who can grab a rebound and at least put it on the floor 1 or 2 times to get the ball up the floor. McDaniel, PJ Washington has also been hurt for these last couple games. McDaniels has stepped in nicely in that role. Cody Martin, who I think people are a bit surprised right now that Cody Martin is in the rotation over our lottery pick, James Bouknight. That is not super surprising to me. Like, Borrego kind of has a history of bringing along young guards very slowly. Even Lamelo Ball did not start until, 25, 30 games into the season last year. I don't think it's time. Like, I don't think this is a negative thing for James Bouknight. I think it's just, like, he's going to have to show his proof of work, essentially. That's just the way it goes. And Martin has been, I would say, more than serviceable. Obviously, he's a fantastic perimeter defender. He's been incredibly limited offensively thus far in his career. But right now, he seems a bit more comfortable putting the ball on the floor and attacking the rim, particularly off closeouts. And he's been very judicious with his three-point shooting, but he's actually making a few this year, which is a brand new thing. I mean, I think he's like shooting 37% on like 2 attempts a game. So nothing to write home about, but certainly something I think Hornets fans should like have their antenna up about just a little bit to see if that's real at all, because that would help him not be a massive offensive liability that he's been in the past.
So LaMelo Ball, good God. Not only is he fun to watch, I honestly don't know how you really properly defend against him. And it's
Right.
I noted this in the piece too. It's sometimes very comical to watch teams like not even necessarily try to like double him immediately as soon as he crosses half court, but they'll try to double him out of like getting into a pick and roll, and they'll bring the guy who should be covering the big man rolling to the basket over to try and double LaMelo. And it's like that's child's play for him. Like he's gonna hit Plumlee in the lane with an uncontested shot at the rim like every single time. If you try and double him or trap him, off the wing or like one of the corner spots, like he's gonna whip the ball to the opposite end and he's gonna hit the open corner shooter like every single. Like you literally can't double this guy.
Right.
He's too big for that. He's too skilled. His court vision is absolutely tremendous. Like, talk to me about what you're seeing from him, kind of his development from year 1 to year 2 already early on in the season, and like, is there really a good way to defend against him, or is this just more of what we're going to continue to see from him?
Well, look, if he's going to shoot 50% from 3, no, there is there is no way to defend him. Obviously, he's not going to end the season shooting 50% from 3. He finished his rookie year shooting 35% from 3 on about 5 attempts per game, which I think most like draft opinion makers and pontificators would say that was probably ahead of schedule. I think he's clearly taking another step forward as a jump shooter. Although we're going to see some mean reversion there at some point.
At some point, yep.
At some point, right? But no, I think you make a really good point. I think the difficulty that opposing defenses find themselves in is exactly what you just laid out. If you have an elite on-ball defender, your best chance is probably to kind of like live with the results of that rather than trying to blitz him, because like you said, he's so big he can see over the defenses. And I mean, his passing is essentially wizardry. Like the guy has every pass in the book with both hands. He sees things before they happen. And I think one under discussed quality about LaMelo thus far, because like the offense has been so incredible, he still has major improvements to make, particularly as a point of attack defender. I think everyone knows that. But the same like cerebral genius that gives him the ability to make all the passes that he makes on the offensive end also translates to some pretty special defensive anticipation stuff on the other end as well. And it's that same, like, whatever is going on in his brain, it's kind of that same result on both ends. It just manifests itself differently. He's averaging like almost 2 steals a game right now. He led our team in steals last year as a rookie. I think that besides the passing, which will always be his calling card, I think as LaMelo Ball kind of turns into whatever kind of star that looks like he's going to be turning into, I think the defensive anticipation stuff will kind of become synonymous as a quality that everyone talks about. Like LaMelo's he's so long, he sees
Yep.
things on the defensive end before they happen. So that's a point I always like to try to make when I'm talking about LaMelo. But yeah, man, there's really not much else to say. He's been absolutely phenomenal in the start of his second season of his career. I guess the last thing I would say is, when I was talking about expectations for this team, when I gave the half glass full optimistic take, if you wanted to go that way, the roadmap for that was most, not all, but most superstars in the NBA make a pretty massive jump in their second year. You saw that, I think, most notably with Luka Doncic.
Yep.
I said this prior to the season. If the Hornets were going to become a truly interesting first round playoff team, maybe even give a scare to somebody in the first round, or who knows, maybe even get out of a first round, it was going to have to be, in general, the young core getting better, but specifically, it was going to have to be LaMelo Ball making that kind of patented second year superstar jump. And look, we're 4 games into the season, but it seems to be happening before our eyes.
Really, to me, with Lamelo, there's really only two kind of things you can do against him. The first would be, I guess, you kind of let him live and die in isolation, which
Right.
it's really picking your poison on that one, because he was one of the better isolation guards in the entire NBA last year. He hasn't been quite as good by the synergy percentiles this year, but again, we're only 4 games in. I would assume that some of that balances itself out as well. The other thing would be, you have a guard who understands how to play him defensively, and let him turn a little bit of the corner and kind of go inside, but not to the point where he's seeing everything else going on around him and whipping the ball to the other side of the court. Having him sort of get a shot up in the lane, but contested by a big man who maybe not isn't like an elite shot blocker, but at least somebody who is really good at contesting and not fouling. And you're putting that sort of pressure on LaMelo to finish around the basket, because he still has that, I want to kiss it high off the glass. I want to finish with flair and pizzazz, but I don't really want to go into anybody. Like,
Right.
he doesn't want to finish through anybody. So that's really it. And I know that you probably understand this as well, Lee, watching him. Like, you look at his body all the time. He's going to keep filling out. He's going to keep getting stronger. I don't think he lacks any sort of touch around the basket. It's more of mechanically just his style and what he wants to do. But as soon as he does get stronger, as soon as he becomes more comfortable with crashing more often into the defense, which he's actually become a pretty good free throw shooter as well. So that will only
Yep.
keep adding scoring average as well. But that's something I envision being corrected eventually. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but definitely by like year 4, as he's much more physically mature in the league. I would expect that to be corrected. So it really is like, what the hell are you gonna do against this guy?
Yeah, and I think the only other thing that I could say, which is it's an external factor that LaMelo really can't control all that much, is the Hornets are shooting 40% from 3 right now as a team. So, those teammates right now are knocking in those open opportunities that he's producing. Now, you might say that's unsustainable, and it probably is to a degree, but this team shot 36% from 3 last year, and to our point earlier, Terry Rozier has barely even played yet, and he's our
Yep.
best shooter. So again, I am like you. I don't envy these opposing coaches that are trying to game plan for LaMelo Ball right now, because look, I mean, Marcus Smart is one of the premier perimeter defenders in the NBA, and LaMelo, kind of had his way. I think you made a fantastic point about LaMelo's isolation creation. I think that was another thing that was ahead of schedule last season. He just abused more cumbersome, slower-footed post when he got the switches, and that was something that I think people were slightly unsure on, like what's his burst like, what's his separation like. I think he's made another little step forward. It seems like this year he's even kind of getting around the corner on the pick and roll a bit easier than even last year.
Well, it's his manipulation of the ball. Like that ball is on a
Totally.
string, and this year. What's fascinating is that last year it seemed like every single thing he did was dictated off of his handle. Now you get to what he's doing in these first 4 games, and it's not only the handle, but it's also more of the start stop stuff is coming along. Like that's
Yep.
what we see from John Morant with Memphis. That's how he's taken such a massive leap so quickly in his career, was that he kind of had more of that from day one. And I think that his dribble craft and his handle have been what's improved in the NBA, not necessarily the change of pace type stuff. It was the opposite for Lamelo, and now Lamelo is really reaping the rewards from putting in that time, that work, that effort to really get better at that. And yeah, he's making defenders look absolutely silly when it's him on an island versus somebody, and he already is such a comfortable pull-up jump shooter. The style of
Mm.
offense that they're playing in only better suits that. It allows him to get himself set and take some of those early shot clock jumpers that he already wanted to take anyways, but now everybody else around him is better equipped to let him do so because they're sprinting down the other end of the floor. They're getting set and ready. They're pulling all the defenders with them to the point where there really is only one guy around LaMelo Ball in transition, and he's going to beat that guy more times than not. So it really
That's right.
is just, it's a nice blend of not only player development, but also when a coach understands how to maximize everyone on his team and put them in the best positions to win. I've already been a big fan of James Borrego. I've been a big fan of James Borrego for years, and I think he did a masterful job last year, and he's off to an even better start this year. And speaking of the young guys and matching system with player development, I love this Miles Bridges story, man. I absolutely love it. I thought he was underrated coming out of Michigan State. I thought he got a really raw deal because you can just tell between how hard he plays, how ferocious of a basketball player he is. He wants to rip your lunch out of your hands and eat it himself like that. That's the type of guy that he's always been, going back to when he played at Michigan
Totally.
State. And the Hornets have been very patient with him. They've brought him along, and now they're reaping the rewards of doing that, of being patient with him and giving him the proper time to develop. And it's not like they've asked him to completely transform his game or his style of play. I noted that in the piece. Like, he's not necessarily doing anything different than he's done in the past. He's just getting more opportunity to do so because of the style of play that the Hornets are employing on offense. So why don't you talk to me about what you've seen from Miles Bridges? Do you think a lot of what he's doing right now is sustainable? Because I actually think it is. Like, I know that he's averaging 25 points per game, 8.5 rebounds. He's 53% from the field, 35.7% from three. That's actually lower than what he was at last year.
Right.
94% from the free throw line. That's really a number that stands out to me, especially if he keeps pouring in more and more free throw attempts, which it seems like the Hornets are going to keep doing. They're fifth, I believe, in free throws attempted right now in the NBA. So that's a trend that's going to keep going. But really, because of how he gets his offense, I feel like these numbers are sustainable, and this is just the hyper efficient Miles Bridges that we're going to keep seeing. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I think you were right to point out that Charlotte has been patient to a degree with Miles Bridges. I think kind of the Miles Bridges story has basically been, his first two off seasons with the Charlotte Hornets. Obviously, Miles Bridges is now in his fourth year in the NBA currently. His first two off seasons, Miles Bridges improved, but he probably only improved by like 3%,
Mm-hmm.
3, 4, just a solid little tick up. He was a little bit better each year. And I think Hornets fans and Hornets Twitters, like, disappointed is not the right word. They were just kind of waiting. Like, they were kind of waiting for him to pop. And last season he finally popped. I would say last year, last offseason, entering into his third year, playing out that third year, he probably improved like 8 to 10%, like a pretty significant
Significant.
jump.
Yep.
And a lot of that has to do with what you said, his efficiency. I mean, he was quietly like basically a 50-40-90 guy last year.
Yep.
Just slightly below the 90 on the free throws. He was 50 from the field and 40 from three. Obviously, I think another great point that you're making is he hasn't really changed a whole lot as a player. Although his individual skills have all improved, he's still pretty much playing the same role for us. You know,
Hmm.
he's kind of this positionless switch army knife, versatile offensive and defensive both ended wing. The shooting, of course, has been a massive, um, I think, factor in the way that he has kind of burst onto the scene. He's also slowly but surely improved as an individual defender, and he's really, I think, if I could point to one thing to say, there actually is some fairly noticeable change in his ability. I would say it's the off the dribble stuff.
Yep.
He's incredibly comfortable attacking closeouts now. And this year, particularly, although we're still very early, you're starting to see signs of like not even just like catch and go stuff, but like put the ball on the floor and isolation create, whether that's just using his brute strength to get right to the basket, or whether that's even actually like using some dribble combination moves to create space and get to the basket or get to like kind of his little step back jumper that he loves. So what I said prior to the season was, you know, after I laid out kind of those percentage improvements, right? If he makes another, you know, even conservatively like a 6 to 8% improvement, you're all of a sudden talking about a fringe all-star player. And that's kind of what we've seen. I mean, he was the Eastern Conference Player of the Month or Player of the Week in the first week of the season. You just laid out kind of all of his like traditional raw numbers. I mean, those are all-star numbers. Um, he had a massive game against Brooklyn, which I think was really good to see because, you know, obviously Brooklyn has their fair share of star power, to put it lightly. Um, so I think it's very real. I think the raw numbers are probably going to come down just a little bit, but all of the other stuff is very sustainable because we've now seen it for one full season and carried over right into another season with another step forward. The last thing I'll say about Miles is his willingness to do whatever the team needs him to do. And I know that sounds like slightly cliche or whatever, but it's actually true and actually matters, I think, with Miles Bridges, because last year he was asked to come off the bench and he did so with a smile on his face and was a like there were I could count I could rattle off a number of games last year where Miles Bridges enters the game, and this was actually a trend with the Hornets last year. Like the starters were not they did not start fast most of the time last year. Most of the time it was the injection of like either a combination of Miles Bridges and LaMelo Ball or a combination of Miles Bridges and Malik Monk off the bench would jump started the team and got them going. So Miles Bridges is happy to come off the bench. He's happy to start, which you see this season.
Yep.
He's also happy to be kind of this ancillary glue guy. And he's also happy to bump the usage up and become more of a playmaker, which you saw in the last 6 to 8 weeks of the season
Yes.
last year when Hayward and Ball and even Devontae Graham were hurt at times. So, like, the last point I just wanted to make is I think he's so valuable because he's literally willing to plug and play in whatever role helps the team the most.
Yes, he is. He is absolutely willing to make the right play happen, make the right pass for other people. I mean, you saw it multiple times in the Brooklyn game where they have him so accustomed to making just one decision as soon as he catches the ball, right? Like they're pretty good at spacing the floor around him to where if he catches it, he has enough space, he can fire up the three. If that defender is a little in front of him at the point to where he can get the step on the guy, attack the closeout, he will do so. But what I've seen in the few games that I've watched this season already is that when the help defender comes over, he's less willing to like crash into that guy, maybe pick up the offensive foul, but he'll actually stop and he'll turn his back to that guy and then he'll just pass right back out of the play. And that is so important. We know that, you know, Plumlee and Hayward, we already talked about. Those are two guys who are willing to do things like that. LaMelo Ball is very willing to give up the basketball when he needs to. I mentioned Kelly Oubre and Cody Martin. They're also quick decision makers or they'll get rid of the ball. And now you have Miles, who has star qualities in what he can do, but he's also chosen to be unselfish at times maybe a little more than he might think in his head. Like, no, I can probably get through this guy, or no, I could probably finish over this guy, but yeah, I should probably just make the pass out and just keep the ball moving and make sure that we get the best shot possible that we can. When you have a whole team that is collectively bought in to one philosophy to just keep the ball moving and play as fast as we can, defenses are not going to want to keep up with that. Like that I'm glad that you picked up on the distinction that I made about Boston versus Brooklyn. Like
Yep.
Brooklyn, we already know that they're not going to sprint back on defense in the regular season. Like they're not going to care that much. They are of the utmost belief that they're going to walk the ball down the floor. Eventually they're going to hit enough shots to the point where they're either in games, they can win them, or if the game's like ends up being that far out of reach because they are missing some of those shots, it's a regular season game. They'll live and die by the result. Boston is a little more motivated. They're a little younger of a team in general. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, those are Marcus Smart. Those are guys who are willing to run and defend. Robert Williams is willing to get back and contest shots at the rim. So it's just completely different. When you go up against a team like that, the results aren't going to be as easy to come by. But if you keep the ball moving as much as you are in the half court, eventually you're going to wear some of those defenders down and they're just not going to be able to keep up. You're going to continue creating open looks. And that only comes from being willing to make the right play and the smart play. And it really has been a joy to watch your Charlotte Hornets lead this year. It absolutely has. Like those kinds of things that I'm talking about are usually something you would say about like the Golden State Warriors, for example, and why the Warriors have been so awesome to watch for all of these years with Steph and Clay and Draymond and all of the instinctual playing off of one another. What Charlotte's doing this year, it's absolutely phenomenal. Now it's not a perfect basketball team, as you alluded to.
Right.
There are some weaknesses on this team. You don't have the most traditional, not necessarily just rim protector, but this more modern type big who can step out, not completely die on an island, be a little more comfortable switching. Like you guys try to switch a lot on defense, but you don't always have the defensive personnel to do so. And that, in my opinion, you alluded to this, like Lamelo Ball can definitely improve at the point of attack defensively. I think you guys are lacking that one special standout wing type defender who can just apply pressure on the other team's best player. Now Miles has gotten better at that. I love watching Miles Bridges play defense. Lamelo, I think that's a reason you called out why Lamelo is special, because if you don't have that elite get a stop type guy, you at least have somebody who is instinctual and can make plays, be a defensive playmaker for you. That's awesome. I love when LaMelo buys in and likes to do all that. But those are really the two weaknesses that I see with this team, and they're not impossible to remedy. Like I would still absolutely keep Mason Plumlee on this roster because of everything he does for the team offensively. Maybe eventually he's not your starting big man. You talked about James Bouknight. There's also Kai Jones waiting in the wings as well. And while James Bouknight and Kai Jones are technically more long-term answers, at the same time, this is still a relatively young Hornets team with plenty of room to grow. So what moves first, Lee? Do you agree with some of what I've said? What moves do you think the Charlotte Hornets need to make to further their status in the Eastern Conference? Do you think some of those long-term answers are already on the roster? Do you think that there's a few trades that need to be made? Where do you see the Charlotte Hornets kind of keeping on with developing and rounding out this roster?
Yeah, well, we haven't touched on PJ Washington too much yet, and part of that is because he's been hurt. PJ is an incredibly important variable of this roster, and the reason why is kind of another point I want to roll into. That could, I mean, it's not negative. It's just something that Hornets fans and NBA fans should be paying attention to. Like I've spent the last 30 minutes like completely gushing about this team. So I think it's fair to go ahead and start throwing out a couple words of warning too. PJ Washington allows the Hornets to quote unquote play small. PJ at the 5 was the Hornets' most successful lineup by leaps and bounds last year.
I remember you and I going back and forth before last season even started, and we're like, PJ Washington better get minutes at the 5. Like they better run this out, and they better figure out that year if it works. And yeah, you just alluded to it. It does in different situations.
It was easily their most successful lineup. You know, Zeller kind of treaded water, and Biombo minutes were just a sieve. I mean, we just hemorrhaged points to opponents when Biz was in the game. God bless his soul. I love Biz, but it looks like right now Mason Plumlee can be a net positive. Maybe not like a massive net positive, but I think he can do a little bit better than tread water, hopefully, at his positional minutes. Why PJ is so important is the point I want to make, and that's about the closing lineup. The Hornets closing lineup, I think, in most situations should probably be some combination of, when we're healthy, Lamelo Ball, Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward, Miles Bridges, PJ Washington. And that's a lineup that gives Lamelo Ball the most space possible to create late in games. And it's the same thing. Like, if you want to have the playoff conversation, it's the same thing. Like,
Yep.
playoffs are more tense, tight. The spacing gets tighter. The defense is more locked in. It's the same thing late in games. So when PJ's not out there, or when PJ's just not playing well, that is a massive drag on this team, because that closing lineup is so important. And the reason why, and you kind of alluded to this in your article, like, if you look at all the Hornets numbers from last year, it's hard to put your finger on why this team was kind of able to outperform expectations. Because from a defensive rating standpoint, they were league average. And even though they were league average, a lot of that was just because of, like, honestly, intelligent masking on Borrego's part. Like, he played a ton of zone. I think the Hornets might have even played the most zone in the NBA last year. And kind of the switchable defense that you talked about earlier, which gets us in trouble sometimes, but also mask a lot of our deficiencies at times too. And the offensive rating was actually like 22 or 23 last season. So
Oh yeah,
those
all the offensive numbers are completely night and day so far,
totally.
and you're right that we can't expect a lot of those efficiencies to stay quite up where they are, but at the same time, like, I think overall you guys are probably going to end up finishing like a top 10, top 12 offensive team at this point. Like, I don't
I
think
think
that's
that's
up for
realistic.
debate. So yeah.
No, I think that's realistic. And so, like, when you're looking at last season and you're saying, well, how the heck did they outperform expectations? And then you go look at the clutch numbers and you realize that the Charlotte Hornets by far led the NBA in clutch shooting. So, which is just, and you know this, I'm just saying it for the audience. It's defined as a game within 5 points in the last 5 minutes. So the way that the Hornets last season were able to make up for all of the other numbers that did not conclude that they should be where they were was because of how incredibly clutch shooting they had late in games
Yep.
and how many close games they won. So this goes back to the closing lineup point. Most of that clutch shooting was done by Devontae Graham and Terry Rozier. Obviously, Devontae Graham's not on this team right now, and Terry Rozier's hurt. So the point I'm trying to make here with PJ Washington and with the closing lineup is, can the Hornets sustain their ability to create efficient offense late in games, because they're going to be in a lot of close games? And can they do that without Devontae Graham shooting? And can they get PJ Washington back on track because of how important he is to that closing lineup at the 5 position? And can Lamelo Ball, who frankly was not in a lot of closing lineups last year because of how good Rozier and Graham were late in games, can he be that offensive hub late in games that makes this team, that gives this team the ability to win a bunch of close games and create efficient offense when things get tense? Because that's what you have to do, you know, to win close games against good teams and to ever even think about winning a playoff series.
So wouldn't be draft deeper without me asking you not just about Lamelo and Miles, but also about the even younger guys that they have on the Hornets. I alluded to these two a little bit in the previous question that I asked you, but what are your long-term thoughts on James Bouknight and Kai Jones? What were your evaluations on them coming into last draft, and how do you think they can help the Hornets in the long term in the future?
Yeah, so I was probably higher on Kai Jones than consensus. He ended up, I believe, 10th on my board. My whole thing with Kai Jones has been, okay, he's kind of been dubbed as this massive reward or bust prospect, like these massive variables. And although I completely understand how people come to that conclusion, because at surface level, I get it. Like he either could be this 7 foot, playmaking, rim protecting, like star, or he could be out of the league in 5 years because none of that ever comes together. And my take on Kai was always, yes, I see the upside that may or may not ever realize, but I thought he had a higher floor than most. And the reason why is some of the stuff you saw in the preseason. Like, his motor runs incredibly hot. He
Mm-hmm.
plays hard. He's obviously an athletic outlier. So just as like a rim protecting, rim running, vertical lob threat, pick and roll, energy big, I feel like there is a place for Kai Jones in the NBA for a long time. Now, I do think it's going to take him a little while to get to that point. He has been on the active roster this entire season. He has not been sent to Greensboro yet, as some of his other counterparts have. I think we'll probably see him get some reps in the G League, which would not be a bad thing, I don't think.
No, that's never a bad thing. I hate when people
Right,
say the G League is somewhere where these players go to die. Like that's not the case. It's not the D League anymore. It's the G
right.
League is a much better environment now.
Yeah, well, and look, I mean, say what you want about Cody Martin, but he's a guy that developed through the G League. We've had quite a few kind of like player development success stories that have spent time in Greensboro. So there's nothing wrong with that. I agree with you. So I was high on Kai Jones for that reason. I'm still high on Kai Jones. Like, if any of the like off the dribble shooting stuff ever comes online, that is just gravy on top, and you're starting to look at a very, very impressive player. Whether that does or does not, I don't really have a strong opinion on it. I'm just saying, if it does, like, that's his ceiling,
And,
you know?
and I'm not saying that it definitely works out for Kai Jones. I was probably a little not probably. I know I was lower than him than a lot of other people on draft
Mhm.
Twitter coming into last year. But if it does work out for him, defensively, that's the kind of weapon that you guys need. Like, for all of the reasons that
Totally.
you laid out, why PJ Washington should be the closing five right now when he's healthy, like Kai Jones in 2 years could be an even more souped up version of that, and probably ideally what
Great
you would
point.
want in that closing lineup. So it's like you might not have the long term answer there right now, but at the same time, I wouldn't break the bank to try and go out and get a different big man than the combination of PJ and Mason that you already have, because Kai could be that guy 2 years down the road, and he could be absolutely perfect to slide in another rim running transition type big, like you said, somebody who at Texas was actually a pretty good perimeter defender for his
Yes.
size by the metrics. So like that's more of what you guys need that would allow you to play this switchable style that you guys seem to want to do all the time. So I really like Kai for this team. Depending on the team he would have went to and been drafted by, I can definitely have a little bit more of a disagreement. But I think for where the Hornets are at right now, they're still young enough to be patient with him, just as they were patient with Miles. I think it could be a great place for him to develop, grow, and then ultimately play a role on a really good basketball team. What about James Bouknight?
Yeah, so Book Knight, I was absolutely lower on than the consensus. He ended up 27th on my board.
That is
Look,
really low compared to consensus.
yeah, it was, and it wasn't that I like was super down on him as a player. There were just so many kind of wings and guards that I preferred to him. Kind of like the Duartes and Giddies and Cameron Thomas and but like I just liked them all a little bit more. Um, One of my main concerns with Book Knight, of course, was the shooting to a degree. And this wasn't necessarily his fault because he was on a UConn team that was fairly abysmal, particularly like from a playmaking standpoint. It was
Yep.
it was almost like it was almost the Cole Anthony effect, where like he was just getting the ball with like 8 seconds left on the shot clock, with all of his teammates looking at him and being like,
Yep.
please do something. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yes.
So that forced him into a ton of bad shots, a ton of bad situations. So I get that, and that's important context. I just thought that coming into the league, he was kind of going to be over dependent on his ability to make plays with the ball in his hands. And if you're not a incredibly efficient offensive producer with the ball in your hands in the NBA, you don't get to have the ball in your hands in the NBA. So
Mm-hmm.
he's going to have to figure out a way to be kind of like this, all because he's super athletic. I mean, when he slices into the lane, like he cuts through defenses like butter at times. He's a very athletic finisher. He can absorb contact. So like the road mark to success for him, other than becoming an efficient off-ball shooter, which I think is possible but will be difficult, is him being this like very cerebral kind of filling into space, attacking closeouts, off-ball cutter, all of that stuff, which honestly would pair pretty well with Lamelo, I think, if he can figure it all out.
Well,
I
the
was
other
just
part too to that is Miles is also kind of laying out the blueprint for a lot of that, right? Like if
very
Book
true.
Knight can kind of be a clone of him in some aspects, just applying pressure on the basket and cutting, making the same kind of timely cuts. I mean, Book Knight is that level of athlete to where he's quick enough attacking those closeouts, like he's going to apply a similar type of pressure. So yeah, maybe the roadmap's already being laid out for him.
Right, yeah, just follow that Bridges blueprint, man. And like I felt bad for him too, because our summer league team, although it had like some very interesting prospects on it, it just had nothing at the point guard position to organize offense. So he was almost back in this probably very like deja vu scenario for him at UConn and on our summer league team, where again, just like him having to try and create something against loaded defenses late in shot clocks. And he scored the ball pretty well in summer league and in preseason, but it just wasn't the perfect situation for him. So the last thing I'll say on Book Night is, although I was a little lower on him than consensus, I have become more optimistic about his fit with this roster specifically. And I think he will get his opportunity. And it may even come tonight against the Magic with Rozier out, kind of depending on how Cody Martin plays. I think it's possible we'll see Book Night soon. But either way, he'll get his opportunities eventually, and it'll just be about how he responds to them. And I'm cautiously optimistic that he can do it.
The Charlotte Hornets, what a fantabulous, fun basketball team. I love watching the Hornets at this point. I'm going to continue to watch the Hornets this year. We're recording this on Wednesday the 27th. Yeah, they're
Yep.
playing the Magic tonight. We're very close to tip off. I'll definitely get you out of here with plenty of time to get ready for tip off. Hornets win tonight. Hornets beat the Magic.
I think so, but like it's kind of like low key a big game. You know, we're 3-1 right now. If you drop a game to the Magic and you don't look great doing it, it kind of starts I guess like the fun, energetic vibes start to wear off a little bit. You're 3-2, you know, you're coming into a tough part of the schedule. If they can look good tonight without Rozier and Washington again, and kind of like, doesn't necessarily have to be a blowout, just like a convincing solid win, I think you're looking at like the momentum really continuing to build. So I think from a narrative standpoint, it's actually like kind of a big game.
Two more questions to get us out of here, hopefully on a high note. Does Miles Bridges win Most Improved Player? And where do the Hornets finish in the Eastern Conference? Do you see them comfortably as a playoff team? Do you see them as comfortably in the play-in, barely making the play-in? Where do you see the Hornets?
All right, so I'll say yes for Miles because why not? I think obviously if he continues on this tear, he's a shoe-in for it. I'm sure there'll be some stiff competition for that. But yeah, I'll go ahead and say yes to that. I said prior to the season that the Hornets would win 43 games, which is actually so there's 4 co-hosts on the Buzz Beat Pod, and I was the highest win total of them all. So I was the optimistic
Oh, you're
guy.
looking damn good right now, man.
Hey, I know, I'm loving it so far. So I said 43 wins and 7th in the East. So I will stick to that. Although like there's Chicago looks fantastic, Atlanta looks unbelievable. The Knicks are they've smashed Philly last night. Like there's some real competition here in the East. But I'm optimistic right now, and why not? We're 3-1.
My Philadelphia 76ers are in trouble. I am not. This is not just an overreaction to last night against the Knicks. I think last night against another good basketball team, you saw everything come to a head that I was afraid of without Ben Simmons or without the right package back in return for him to this point. I don't know if you caught any of the game last night or not, but like they can't guard a fly. They can't guard. They can't keep anybody else in front of them. And I said this to Chuck on his podcast. I was like, if you put every single ounce of pressure on Embiid's shoulders to quite literally carry everything defensively for that team, I just don't know what that's going to look like. And Chuck is like, I'm very optimistic about Embiid. I believe in him. If I had to pick any player in the league to be the best player in the league on any given day, like that's my guy. And I'm like, that's great. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but this is a Joel Embiid that misses time every single year. You're going to ask him to do even more than he's already had to do. Like, I just don't know how that works. And God, Danny Green can't guard anybody. Matisse Thybulle can't do anything offensively to kind of spell Danny Green minutes. And I don't know. I'm just at least Tyrese Maxey. That was one of your guys, by the way, right? Maxey was one of your boys.
Well, I was higher on Quickly than Maxey.
Higher on Quickly. That's right.
Yeah.
But at least he's like a little bit of a bright spot. And then obviously when Embiid is on and it doesn't have to do every single thing for that team, he's terrific. But any parting thoughts for me about my 76ers? Any sort of optimism you can give me?
Oh man, Seth Curry, man.
Seth Curry's been terrific.
Just keep getting him the rock.
That's
no, man. I and I don't think we want to go down the Ben Simmons rabbit hole right now, but I am hopeful, and I'm not nearly as plugged in as you, so I don't really know what the update is. But I would just love to see him back, man. I think I don't know. I like you said, the defensive load needs to be shared, and obviously, if there's one thing Ben Simmons can do, is he can guard. He can guard. So, I think like you guys will figure it out, man. You guys will figure it out.
I hope so. It's right now to me. It's a race between who will have a better record, the Hornets and the 76ers. And if you had to ask me, today, I don't know, man. I might be leaning towards you guys. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But Lee, this was a fantastic podcast. I can't thank you enough for wanting to come on again. One more time for my audience, please share where they can find you on social media as well as where they can find everything that you're doing.
Yeah, at Which Carolina on Twitter, at BuzzBeat Pod for all of our Hornets content. We put out at least 2 episodes a week. Particularly during the season, it's a lot of post-game reaction stuff. And then at Which Carolina for the Which Carolina podcast for all of my NBA draft content. So, man, Nathan, I really appreciate you having me on, man. This was a blast, and anytime you'll have me, I'll show up.
Oh, we're gonna talk about some 2022 draft, baby. Don't you worry. We'll get that going. But that's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. Again, thank you all so much for listening out there. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast already, you can find this along with all of the other podcasts on the No Ceilings Podcast Network through our link tree, linktr.ee/No Ceilings NBA. You'll find my show on there, Draft Deeper. You'll find the Draft Act podcast on there. They just released an episode today, which I still have yet to listen to, but I'm going to listen to it tonight on Patrick Baldwin Jr. I'm sure that's fantastic. You can find Backcourt Violation on there as well as NBA Deep Dives. Follow me on Twitter at Draft Deeper. I'm always on there talking hoops, so definitely come on, continue to engage with me on that platform. And then subscribe to the No Ceiling Substack, where we have links quite literally all over social media on where to find that content. So get subscribed to that email newsletter. You'll get daily content Monday through Friday in your inbox. Can't wait to continue that trend. But thank you all again for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your week.